There used to be a time where the mini PC was an underpowered machine destined to run Excel for Carol and HR. Not anymore. The recent trend we're seeing is PCs getting smaller and smaller, yet getting more powerful. Today, I'm taking a look at one of the highest spec mini PCs you can get right now in the AceMagic AM08, a tiny little device sporting an 8-core Ryzen chip with built-in RDNA 2 graphics and 32GB of RAM. Actually crazy. In terms of size, I've definitely seen smaller depending on how I wake up, but this guy is still pretty freaking compact. And if this is somehow too big for you, then I'm convinced you're some kind of rodent, in which case that's pretty badass that you're watching YouTube right now. It's about 7 inches tall and 3 inches wide at the base, which, depending on who you ask, is a nice size. Personally, I think that sounds terrifying. In terms of actual specs, it's running an 8-core 16-thread Ryzen 9 6900HX, which has a boost clock up to 4.9 GHz, an integrated Radeon 680M, 32GB of DDR5 4800 MHz, and a 512GB NVMe drive. We also get Wi-Fi 6 and Bluetooth 5.2. For I/O, on the front we have a 3.5mm combo audio jack, dual USB 3 ports at 5 gigabits per second, and a USB 4 USB-C port. And on the back we get another pair of USB 3 Type A ports, a pair of HDMI 2.0, 2.5 gigabit LAN, and a barrel plug for power. The outside is plastic, but it still feels pretty nice. And in terms of looks, it's obviously subjective, but I like it for a desktop system. It's nice to see something in this category that isn't just another rectangle. Sometimes you gotta add a little spice. Bam, bam, bam. The big draw here is clearly the RGB integration, which I'm not usually a fan of, but personally, I think it looks pretty decent on here. And some of you may have noticed the power button also doubles as a performance knob, which you can turn to set the PC to either quiet, auto, or performance mode. I first assumed this was a gimmick that was just setting a fan curve, but I was wrong. More on that in a bit. When we shed the outer layer, which is conveniently held on by magnets, we get direct access to the RAM, NVMe drive, and 2.5-inch SATA bay. Imagine having 16 terabytes of high-speed storage in this thing. That's silly. And all of this for a price of $650. I think that's it for the specs. Let's talk about what it's like to actually use this thing. I'm running Windows 11 on here since that's what it comes with, and like, what else would you run? It's listed in the gaming section on their website. And now we sit back and listen to the Linux fanboys tell me that gaming on Linux is just as good. Oh yeah, there they are. Yeah. Now, of course, I had to hit it with Cinebench to get some raw horsepower numbers here, and in R23, we got a score of 12,472. I think we could get a bit more out of this chip because the temps weren't very high at all, and the clock speed seemed a bit low even for an all-core boost. This may be a good time to note that everything I'm testing is done with a dial set to performance mode, which actually controls what the CPU is doing. In performance mode, we saw the full boost up to 4.9 on a single core and 3.6 across all cores in Cinebench. Then when moving down to auto, it seemed to act similar but with slightly lower clocks, so I'd consider this more of a normal mode. Then when going down to quiet, the clocks are pushed all the way down to 2 GHz, which you may be thinking, why would you ever want that? Let me answer that because I actually love this feature. I'm someone who absolutely hates fan noise in a PC and will sacrifice performance if it can make my PC consistently quieter. Hell, I did a whole ass video about putting my PC in another room. Having the ability to keep my PC on quiet mode when I'm just browsing around or watching YouTube is awesome and even saves power. Then when I'm editing or playing games, I can just easily switch the dial to performance mode. No software needed. This is actually pretty freaking cool. I wish you had a bit more control over what each setting mode did, but I'm not that anal about it. Obviously, this affects the fan speeds as well. Okay, moving on. We saw that we have some pretty solid raw horsepower, but this little dude is a gaming PC. Just look at the RGB. To test this, I threw the quintessential benchmark game at it with Cyberpunk 2077. Now let's be honest with ourselves for a second here. You're not running AAA titles at 4K on this thing. You'd have better luck trying to find another radar viewer out in the wild. I know you guys don't actually go outside. I started off with 1080p high settings and yeah, this isn't very playable with my FPS sitting in the low 20s. I had a trick up my sleeve though with AMD FSR, which is basically the Walmart version of NVIDIA's DLSS. These are very complex systems that could be discussed for hours, but the gist of it is that they render the game at a lower resolution, then scale it up to your specified resolution, which gives you the performance of the lower resolution, but with the fidelity of the higher resolution. When turning this on to performance mode, we were seeing a consistent 30 FPS, which doesn't sound that impressive, but that's like a 40% improvement from before. And honestly, it just feels a lot better. I might be so bold as to say it's playable. If you're willing to go down the medium settings, then you can get about 8 FPS more too. But if you're one of those people who plays with the FPS counter on, then you'll probably be stepping down to 720p. At 720p medium settings, FSR on, we got our nice 60 FPS gameplay, but it sure doesn't look that great. In a fast-paced AAA title, then maybe this is the way to go, but in an RPG like this where the graphics and environment is often more important than buttery smooth movement, I think our 1080p medium settings with FSR was the sweet spot. Now remember, this is one of the most demanding games out right now, and this is a PC that can fit in your pocket. If you're looking to run some esport titles like CSGO or League of Legends, then this thing is plenty enough. Maxing out League at 4K had us over 100 FPS, and if you have a problem with that, then I don't know what to tell you. This is kind of where I wish we had an HDMI 2.1 port, since there are cases where you could potentially be pushing over 100 FPS and running at 4K. You can achieve that by utilizing both of the HDMI ports, but nobody wants to do that. The general consensus is that this thing can rip through esports titles even at 4K and actually hold its own in AAA titles. But what about using this thing for stuff that's not gaming? I know, RGB, so that's not allowed. I downloaded DaVinci Resolve and imported one of my projects to see how this thing would handle a 4K timeline with various different video codecs and effects. It was honestly pretty decent. I mean, it's not amazing, but it's very usable. I'm used to editing on my 13900K system with an RTX 4090 that I call the compensator, so obviously this is going to be a step down. I noticed when making proxies in real time that I was waiting a good bit longer for these to render out, where the compensator would just rip right through them. I can't knock this thing though. It's like 139 times smaller and roughly $4 billion cheaper. If you would have told me 5 years ago that a machine this size could handle editing a 4K timeline without making me pull my hair out, then maybe I'd still have hair. So who is this for? That is a hard question to answer because I'll be honest, I love mini PCs. They're just so freaking cool. Seeing the amount of performance you can get out of something like this has always rustled my jimmies. But I don't think I'd ever use one as my main PC, which kind of seems like how this is marketed with the aesthetics and the physical control dial. This is mainly because I really don't need my PC to be that small. A normal size PC isn't that big to where I couldn't just go with a small form factor build if I really wanted something small. So again, I ask, who is this for? I think this is a really awesome starter PC for kids that are just getting into PC gaming and still want something pretty cool. Also, for the people who actually need something this small, whether that's because their dedicated PC area is actually small or just overrun with Mountain Dew cans. But I think the biggest use case here is actually for this thing to be a living room PC. It's small enough to slide in behind your TV and powerful enough to get an awesome gaming experience out of. Now, should you buy this one? Well, do you like the aesthetics and performance style? Did the benchmarks and usability I showed align with your use case? Is it in your budget? If so, then go right ahead. If not, there are other brands with the same spec that come in a nice generic square form factor. In fact, for a fraction of the price, you can get a nice AceMagic Square, but with RGB. This is the AK1, and at $150, this is what I'd be looking at if I was looking for something to cluster in my home lab with, or just use as a low-power Docker box. It's got a 4-core Intel N95, 16 gigabytes of RAM, and a 512 gigabyte NVMe drive. The specs aren't crazy here, but it's a decent low-power, small option for your home lab. But that's all I have for you today. If you liked the video, then drop a like. If you want to see more mini PCs, then subscribe, as I really like looking at these things. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube members and my Patreons. You guys are my cute little RGB mini PC with a billion gigabytes of RAM. I appreciate all of you. And if you're still watching, I appreciate you too. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one.